Do you know what is more dangerous than an angry woman? A woman who goes completely quiet. When the screaming stops, she begins to count. She counts every penny, every lie, and the days until the traitor loses everything. If you think denying my motherhood is a victory, brace yourself. The bill for that arrogance will be unimaginable. This is how I burned an empire to the ground, not with fire, but with numbers. Hello to all the wonderful listeners of Maya Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for your incredible support and presence over the years. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the operating budget to continue, which means we are forced to halt new uploads here in the near future and transition our operations entirely to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon, where you will get access to exclusive true stories that are much longer, packed with intricate details we cannot share publicly on YouTube, and fully produced with multiple emotional voice actors in a single narrative. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us dive into today's story and meet our main character, Ashley Weaver. The air in the living room was heavy with the scent of expensive catered food and the hollow laughter of people who only respected money. I am 38 years old, the lead architect at Apex Skyline Design, and this was supposed to be my night. The housewarming party was held in the stunning glass mansion nestled in the hills of Denver, a flawless architectural marvel that I had designed with my own two hands. Every sleek line, every floor-to-ceiling window reflecting the city lights below, bore my signature. More importantly, I had personally financed exactly 90% of the entire project. From the deep foundation to the custom Italian leather sofas, my husband's friends were currently spilling expensive wine on. My husband, Marcus, who had just turned 42, was holding court near the fireplace, playing the role of the self-made king. He loved the aesthetic of wealth, especially when he did not have to pay for it. The evening was proceeding with a tight, artificial grace until his daughter, Chloe, finally decided to make an appearance. Chloe was 19 years old and possessed the kind of manufactured confidence that only comes from spending someone else's money. She strutted through the front doors exactly 2 hours late, utterly unapologetic and radiating a thick cloud of designer perfume. She was wearing a breathtakingly expensive silk ensemble, a piece from a spring collection that I had quietly paid off just last month after she begged Marcus for it. She barely acknowledged my colleagues, completely ignored my parents, and shot a look of pure, unfiltered disdain at my younger sister before grabbing a glass of champagne from a passing tray. Her condescension was not a subtle trait. It was a weapon she wielded freely, knowing her father would always act as her ultimate shield. The breaking point arrived during the toasts. We were gathered around the custom marble dining table, surrounded by some of the most influential developers in Colorado and a handful of Marcus's loudest friends. Chloe tapped her silver knife against her crystal glass, demanding the room's attention. She raised her drink, her eyes locking onto mine with a mocking, victorious gleam. "To my dad," she announced, her voice echoing off the towering glass walls, "for finally securing a castle big enough for his ambitions, and to Ashley, I guess, for being the most reliable, aesthetically boring ATM a family could ever ask for. Cheers to funding the dream." A few of Marcus's friends chuckled, their laughter thick with alcohol and malice. My top clients exchanged nervous, wide-eyed glances, shifting uncomfortably in their seats. The disrespect was not just palpable, it was practically radioactive. I set my glass down on the marble surface, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my expression entirely unreadable. "Chloe," I said, my voice steady and completely devoid of warmth. "That was incredibly inappropriate and deeply disrespectful. I expect an apology to me and to our guests right now." I waited for Marcus to step in. I waited for the man I had married to establish a firm boundary, to defend his wife in her own home, in front of her own professional peers. Instead, A heavy, suffocating tension dropped over the dining table. Marcus shifted his weight, his face darkening with sudden, irrational anger. His hand shot out under the table before I could even blink. His large fingers clamped around my wrist like a steel trap, squeezing so hard I felt my bones grind together. He leaned toward me, his smile fixed perfectly in place for the watching audience, but his voice was a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "She is not your daughter. Do not correct her." He let go abruptly, picking up his own drink as if he had not just shattered our entire marriage into a million jagged pieces. There were no tears. I did not gasp, nor did I stand up and scream at the sheer indignity of it all. A profound, terrifying silence washed over my mind, instantly drowning out the chatter, the soft background music, and the clinking of silverware. I looked down at my wrist, noting the rapidly forming red marks where his fingers had violently dug into my skin. In that singular, crystal-clear moment, a glacial chill ran down my spine, freezing every drop of affection I had ever harbored for this man. The fog of love completely lifted. I finally saw my exact position in this household. I was not an equal partner. I was a financial resource, and apparently, a highly disposable one at that. The rest of the evening was a sickening blur of forced smiles and rigid farewells. I played the gracious hostess, nodding and shaking hands as the final guests filed out into the crisp Denver night. The house slowly emptied, leaving behind only the lingering ghosts of Chloe's public insult and Marcus's brutal physical grip. Marcus passed out in the master bedroom almost immediately, his breathing heavy and thick with the smell of scotch, completely oblivious to the absolute monster he had just awakened. I did not go to bed. The massive house was entirely silent, save for the faint hum of the central heating system. I walked down the long, shadowed hallway to my private office. The automatic blinds were drawn tight, sealing me off from the outside world. I sat down at my heavy oak desk, the only source of light coming from the cold, blue glow of my laptop screen. It reflected in my eyes, which I knew were entirely dead to the life I had been living just 3 hours ago. My fingers hovered over the keyboard for a brief second. Slowly, methodically, I began opening every single banking portal, every shared investment account, and every credit card dashboard we owned. If they wanted to treat me like an ATM, they were about to learn exactly what happens when the machine permanently shuts down. By 5 o'clock in the morning, the Denver sky was still a bruised, inky black, but my mind was operating with the cold, flawless precision of a diamond cutter. The alcohol in Marcus's system had ensured he would not wake up for hours, giving me an uninterrupted window to execute my calculations. It is profoundly terrifying how quickly you can dismantle a life when you remove emotion from the equation. I started with the most immediate bleeding arteries. I opened my primary banking portal, my eyes scanning the heavily abused supplementary credit card account under Chloe's name. Just 3 days prior, it had absorbed a charge for $1,200 at a designer boutique. I hovered my cursor over the account settings. Click, the card was permanently frozen. Officially reported as deactivated by the primary account holder, next came her housing. She lived in a luxury downtown loft that cost over $4,000 a month, automatically drafted from my business account. I logged into the property management portal, canceled the auto-pay mandate, and formally withdrew my name as the financial guarantor. Effective immediately. Finally, I accessed the dealership portal for the brand new electric vehicle she paraded around campus. The lease for the luxury car was entirely in my name, relying heavily on my flawless credit score. With 3 methodical keystrokes, I initiated a voluntary lease termination, authorizing the dealership to reclaim their property due to impending non-payment. With the vanity project severed, I moved to the heavy artillery. Over the past 5 years, I had foolishly allowed my substantial bonuses and personal investment yields to funnel into a joint portfolio. No longer. I opened a highly secure, encrypted offshore account that Marcus did not even know existed. I initiated a wire transfer, pulling 100% of my personal liquid assets, mutual funds, and independent stock portfolios completely out of our shared ecosystem. The numbers on our joint checking dashboard plummeted from a comfortable 6 figures down to a sum that would barely cover his next country club fee. To seal the perimeter, I drafted a highly confidential email to the payroll department at Apex Skyline Design. I instructed them to immediately redirect my direct deposits to the new private account. By 6:30 in the morning, the financial guillotine had fallen. I closed my laptop, poured myself a single cup of black coffee, and waited for the sunrise. The fallout did not take long. At exactly 9:15 in the morning, the serene quiet of the mansion was shattered. I was sitting calmly in my office, reviewing blueprints for a new commercial high-rise, when I heard Marcus's phone vibrating violently on the kitchen island, followed by a frantic, high-pitched ringing. A moment later, heavy, rushed footsteps pounded down the hardwood hallway. Marcus burst through my office doors, his eyes bloodshot, his hair disheveled, and his face twisted into a mask of utter outrage. He was holding his phone out on speaker, and Chloe's hysterical shrieking filled the room. She was at an exclusive hair salon downtown, surrounded by her wealthy friends. Her voice was shrill, breaking with absolute humiliation as she screamed that her platinum card had just been publicly declined for an $800 hair extension treatment. The stylist had apparently asked if she had another form of payment, right in front of her sorority sisters. Marcus slammed his hand down on my desk, rattling my coffee cup. "What the hell is going on with the accounts?" he demanded, his voice thick with a mixture of hangover and fury. "Chloe is completely stranded at the salon. They are looking at her like she is a criminal. Fix the card right now." I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, relishing the bitter taste, and calmly reached out to turn my massive desktop monitor toward him. The screen displayed a meticulously organized spreadsheet, highlighting the terminated credit cards, the canceled lease agreement, and the revoked rental guarantor forms. I looked up at him, perfectly mirroring the exact same patronizing, smug smile he had flashed at the dinner party the night before. "I am just respecting your boundaries, Marcus," I said, my tone as smooth and cold as polished marble. "You made it very clear last night in front of all our guests. She is not my daughter, so her bills do not belong to me." For a few seconds, his brain completely short-circuited. The blustering alpha male routine vanished, replaced by the panicked realization of a parasite that had just been severed from its host. He tried to quickly pivot back to his usual tactics, leaning over my desk to physically intimidate me. "You are acting like a spoiled child," he growled, attempting to gaslight me into submission. "You are throwing a pathetic tantrum over a harmless comment. Turn the accounts back on, Ashley, before you do permanent damage to our family." But his threats were hollow, echoing uselessly in the room. He had absolutely zero leverage. He realized, perhaps for the very first time, that despite his loud voice and his arrogant posture, every single drop of cash flow that funded his lavish lifestyle was controlled entirely by my fingertips. I just stared back at him, unblinking, letting the oppressive silence suffocate his remaining bravado. He stormed out of the office, furiously punching numbers into his phone, desperately trying to transfer funds from his failing gym business to cover his daughter's embarrassment. But the avalanche had already begun. With no access to my credit, Chloe was forced to order a standard Uber to flee the salon, leaving her luxury treatments half-finished and her reputation in tatters among her peers. The ultimate indignity came just a few hours later. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, a heavy-duty tow truck pulled up to the driveway of Chloe's downtown apartment building. Because I had officially revoked the authorization and flagged the vehicle, the dealership wasted absolutely no time. While Chloe watched in horror from the lobby, they hitched up her pristine electric car and towed it straight down the avenue. In a mere 12 hours, the glittering, arrogant facade the two of them had built upon my back completely collapsed into the dirt. With the immediate hemorrhage of funds successfully stopped, the initial rush of adrenaline faded into a hyper-focused, terrifying clarity. I spent the next 3 days completely locked inside my home office, surrounded by mountains of printed bank statements, tax returns, and digital spreadsheets. When you finally stop looking at your marriage through the naive lens of trust, the paperwork begins to tell a very different, horrifyingly cold story. I was specifically hunting for the trail of the tuition assistance transfers. For the past 2 years, I had been diligently and generously moving substantial sums of money into an account expressly designated for Chloe's university fees, her luxury dorm room, and her daily living expenses. But as I meticulously traced the routing numbers across the screen, a sickening anomaly glared back at me in stark black and white. The money had never once reached the university bursar. Over $200,000 had simply vanished into thin air, funneled with calculated precision through a complex series of shell transfers, before quietly settling into a blind trust I had never seen or authorized. The deeper I dug into the financial labyrinth, the darker and more suffocating it became. It took me a full 48 hours of relentless searching and one discreet, highly confidential phone call to an old friend in corporate banking to completely crack the protective shield around that shadow trust. The ultimate beneficiary of that stolen money was not Chloe. It was Marcus's primary holding company. The grand narrative he constantly sold to our wealthy social circle was that of a thriving, self-made fitness entrepreneur, the proud owner of a rapidly expanding and exclusive chain of boutique gyms. The grim reality, staring back at me from the undeniable ledger, was a rapidly sinking empire bleeding cash at a catastrophic rate. He had been ruthlessly stealing from his own daughter's education fund, a fund entirely subsidized by my hard work, just to keep the neon lights on in his empty, failing fitness studios. But the theft of the tuition money was merely the appetizer in this banquet of betrayal. The true, absolute horror revealed itself when I decided to run a routine, thorough title search on my personal real estate portfolio, long before I ever met Marcus. I had wisely purchased a highly lucrative piece of commercial land on the rapidly developing edge of the city limits. It was my ultimate safety net, an appreciating asset strictly and legally shielded by our ironclad prenuptial agreement. My blood turned to solid ice as I stared at the screen, discovering a newly registered lien filed against that exact property. Someone had taken out a massive, high-interest mortgage on the land just 6 months ago, using it as collateral for a high-risk business loan. I quickly pulled up the digital, notarized copy of the loan agreement. Right there, on the bottom dotted line, was my signature, or rather, a chillingly near-perfect forgery of my signature. He had not just lied to me, he had committed a major federal financial crime, risking my future to salvage his dying ego. I foolishly expected him to grovel when the initial shock of the cutoff finally wore off. I expected explosive anger, perhaps a desperate, tearful plea for a financial bailout. I fundamentally underestimated the sociopathic depths of the man sleeping in the bedroom down the hall. Rather than confront me about the frozen accounts and the towed car, Marcus initiated a silent, deeply insidious, psychological war. He became disturbingly gentle around the house, speaking to me in soft, overly patronizing tones as if handling a fragile glass doll. Unbeknownst to me, while I was buried in financial forensics, he was busy planting venomous seeds across my entire social and professional network. He began scheduling quiet, supposedly confidential lunches with my closest friends and even some of the senior partners at my architectural firm. He sat across from them, wearing the flawless mask of a heartbroken, exhausted, and desperately concerned husband, and spun a deeply disturbing narrative. He whispered, with fake tears in his eyes, that I was undergoing a severe, crippling midlife psychological crisis. He claimed I was becoming dangerously forgetful, acting erratically, holding on to baseless delusions, and exhibiting terrifying signs of acute paranoia. The dark brilliance of his strategy was genuinely sickening. By proactively framing me as mentally unstable to everyone who mattered, he was effectively discrediting anything I might say about his financial fraud in the future. If I suddenly started screaming about stolen money, secret trusts, and forged signatures, I would just look exactly like the paranoid, delusional wife he had so tragically warned them about. I only discovered this masterclass in manipulation because of Evelyn. Evelyn was the senior managing partner at Apex Skyline Design, a razor-sharp, fiercely protective woman who had shattered every glass ceiling in the architectural industry. On a rainy Tuesday morning, she quietly called me into her expansive corner office. She closed the heavy mahogany door, offered me a cup of warm tea, and looked at me with deep, scrutinizing, yet empathetic concern. With incredible tact and careful phrasing, she mentioned that Marcus had recently reached out to her, expressing deep, agonizing worry about my mental health status and my cognitive ability to handle the stress of our upcoming multi-million-dollar projects. In that sterile, quiet office, the final terrifying piece of the puzzle snapped into place with a deafening click. Marcus was not just trying to cover up his theft. He was methodically laying the legal and social groundwork to declare me completely mentally unfit. He was paving the way to seize full medical and financial power of attorney over my entire estate. He wanted to institutionalize my credibility so he could strip my bones clean without a single soul questioning him. The raw, primal instinct to rage, to storm straight into his failing flagship gym and tear his fake empire down brick by brick in front of his staff, was almost overwhelming. I wanted to scream the truth from the rooftops, but anger is loud, and loud is exactly what he needed me to be. If I acted like a hysterical, vindictive woman, I would be playing right into his meticulously crafted script. So, I took a deep, steadying breath, looked Evelyn dead in the eye, and told her exactly what the reality was, securing my first vital ally. Then, I went home that evening and completely transformed myself. I stopped wearing my signature sharp makeup. I let my shoulders noticeably slump. When Marcus asked me a simple question about dinner, I hesitated, rubbed my temples with a trembling hand, and gave vague, slightly confused answers. I decided to play the part of the sick, exhausted, mentally fragile wife to absolute perfection. I let him believe his gaslighting was working flawlessly, that my mind was slowly unraveling under the immense pressure of my career. I watched his confidence swell in real time, his arrogant swagger slowly returning as he genuinely believed he had successfully outsmarted me and contained the threat. He thought he was watching a broken woman lose her grip on reality, completely unaware that he was actually looking at an apex predator perfectly camouflaged in the tall grass, holding her breath, just waiting for him to step right into the steel jaws of the ultimate trap. While I played the role of the decaying, fragile wife at home, my actual days were spent in the shadows, orchestrating a meticulously planned counteroffensive. I needed a professional executioner. I found one in Richard Vance, arguably the most ruthless, cold-blooded financial divorce attorney in the entire state of Colorado. We met far away from the polished glass of my home and the corporate elegance of my firm, sitting in a sterile, windowless conference room in the basement of his downtown legal fortress. Richard did not deal in emotions. He dealt strictly in absolute destruction. I laid out the forged mortgage documents, the phantom tuition transfers, and the shell company routing numbers. He reviewed them with the quiet satisfaction of a predator smelling blood in the water. We had enough to ruin Marcus financially, but I told Richard I wanted him behind bars, to secure a federal fraud conviction that would stick. Richard explained. We needed unequivocal proof of malicious intent. We needed the smoking gun that proved Marcus knew exactly what he was doing and planned it from the start. Meanwhile, the real-world consequences of my sudden financial freeze were rapidly catching up to Chloe. The property management company overseeing her luxury loft did not care about her prestigious last name or her social media following. When the rent payment bounced and my guarantor status vanished, they slapped a strict eviction notice on her designer door. She was given exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises, in a total panic, stripped of her platinum cards and her electric car. Chloe ran straight to the one person she believed would always save her. She went to Marcus. She found him at his flagship gym, desperately yelling at contractors and trying to organize a massive, flashy launch party for a new branch that was already drowning in debt. Chloe begged him for a simple loan, just enough cash to secure a modest apartment and keep a roof over her head. But the moment she asked for his actual money, the illusion of the doting, generous father instantly evaporated. Marcus coldly dismissed her. He told her she needed to grow up and figure it out herself. He claimed he needed every single cent he could scrape together for his upcoming gala, explicitly stating that his business image was far more important than her living situation. He practically shoved her out the door. In that brutal, agonizing exchange, the thick veil of deception was violently ripped from Chloe's eyes. She realized that Marcus had never truly provided for her. He had merely used her as a convenient, emotionally manipulative conduit to siphon my wealth. When my money stopped flowing through her hands, her value to him dropped to absolute zero. She finally understood who had actually been feeding her, clothing her, and housing her for the past 5 years. It was a Tuesday evening, just past 9 o'clock, when a massive thunderstorm rolled over Denver, washing the city in torrential rain. I was working late alone in my secure office at Apex Skyline, going over blueprints, when the lobby security guard called up to tell me I had a visitor. A few minutes later, the heavy glass door of my suite slowly pushed open. Chloe stood in the doorway, completely drenched, shivering uncontrollably. The arrogant, condescending girl who had mocked me at my dining room table was entirely gone. In her place stood a terrified, broken 19-year-old whose entire reality had just collapsed. Her designer clothes were clinging to her soaking wet frame, and her mascara was running down her pale cheeks in dark, messy streaks. She walked in slowly and stood before my desk, her eyes fixed on the floor. I did not offer her a warm embrace. I did not offer her a hot cup of tea or a comfortable chair. I sat perfectly still, my expression neutral, waiting for her to speak. "You were right," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling over the sound of the rain lashing against the windows. "About everything. He threw me out. He said he did not have a dime to spare for me, all those years. Every single thing I had. It was never him. It was always you." "It is a hard lesson to learn," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of pity. "But an essential one. Why are you here, Chloe?" She reached into her damp, ruined leather handbag with a shaking hand. She pulled out a small rectangular silver object and carefully placed it onto the pristine surface of my desk. It was a high-capacity external hard drive. "He kicked me out of his office today," she explained, her voice gaining a tiny fraction of strength. "But I know his safe combination. I know all his passwords because he's arrogant enough to use my birth date for everything. When he went down to the gym floor to yell at a trainer, I opened his desk. I took his primary backup drive. I looked down at the silver device, a faint spark of dangerous curiosity igniting in my chest. "What is on it?" I asked quietly. "Everything," Chloe replied, finally looking up to meet my eyes directly. "His private ledgers, but mostly his personal email archives. There are dozens of threads between him and a private, unregulated loan broker. They talk about the forged land deed. They talk about the shadow trust. And there is one specific email from my father where he outlines his exact strategy." Chloe paused, swallowing hard before she repeated the words that would ultimately seal her father's fate. "He told the broker not to worry about repayment. He said his plan was to, and I quote, bleed Ashley dry before she catches on, and then lock her away in a clinic." A deafening silence filled the office, heavier than the storm raging outside. I stared at the hard drive, realizing that the ironclad, undeniable proof of intent Richard Vance needed was sitting right in front of me, delivered by the most unlikely ally in the world. I looked back up at Chloe. She was no longer just a spoiled brat. She was a casualty of war who had chosen to hand the enemy the nuclear launch codes. "I want to help you destroy him," Chloe said, her jaw tightening with newfound bitter resolve. I slowly reached out and pulled the silver drive across the desk until it rested perfectly under my hand. I finally allowed a small, sharp smile to form on my lips. The trap was no longer just set. It was fully loaded. The atmosphere inside the glass mansion during the final 2 weeks of our marriage was suffocating. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare, completely devoid of shouting, characterized entirely by the heavy, toxic weight of a predator who firmly believed he had broken his prey. I leaned into the role of the exhausted, mentally deteriorating wife with absolute dedication. I spent my evenings wrapped in a heavy blanket on the sofa, staring blankly at the television, when Marcus approached me with a stack of seemingly innocuous insurance renewals and minor operational agreements for his gyms. I did not question him. I simply took the pen with a deliberately trembling hand and signed my name on the dotted line. I watched his chest swell with arrogant pride. In his mind, his intense gaslighting campaign had been a triumphant success. He truly believed he had beaten me into a state of docile submission. The grand stage for his ultimate validation was set for a Friday night. Marcus had poured the last remaining drops of his stolen funds into organizing a massive, high-profile fundraising gala at a prestigious five-star hotel in the center of Denver. The objective was perfectly clear. He needed to raise at least $3 million from private investors to cover his massive debts and keep his fraudulent fitness empire afloat. However, a man with a failing business has no real leverage. He needed a shiny lure to attract the wealthy sharks, and that lure was my sterling reputation in the Denver real estate and architectural community. He had invited my top clients, senior developers, and wealthy contractors, using my name as the ultimate guarantee of his future success. On the evening of the gala, the psychological pressure reached a sickening peak. I was sitting at my vanity mirror, applying a pale, subdued layer of makeup, when Marcus walked into the bedroom. He was dressed in a razor-sharp, custom-tailored tuxedo, exuding the manic energy of a desperate man about to roll his final dice. He stood behind me, placing his heavy hands on my bare shoulders. His grip was just a fraction too tight, a silent physical threat disguised as a loving embrace. "You are going to wear the emerald silk dress," he instructed, his voice low and laced with pure menace. "And you are going to walk into that ballroom on my arm, smiling like the proud, supportive wife you are supposed to be. I need you to completely dispel these unfortunate rumors about your mental instability." He leaned closer, his dark reflection glaring at me through the mirror. "If you embarrass me tonight," he whispered, his fingers digging sharply into my collarbone, "if you act erratic, or if you refuse to play your part, I will personally go to Evelyn tomorrow morning. I will show the board of directors just how deeply paranoid and unfit for duty you have become. I will make sure Apex Skyline forces you into early medical retirement before the end of the month. Do we understand each other?" I lowered my eyes, playing the part of the cornered victim to the very last second. "I understand, Marcus," I replied softly, letting my voice waver just enough to satisfy his cruel ego. "I will be perfect," he smiled, kissed the top of my head, and walked out of the room. He had absolutely no idea that his entire world was already standing on a legal landmine, and my foot was hovering heavily over the trigger. Earlier that same afternoon, Richard Vance had finalized the ultimate legal guillotine. The silver hard drive Chloe provided was a treasure trove of federal offenses, armed with the explicit emails detailing his premeditated fraud. Richard had moved with terrifying speed. He had secured an emergency order from a highly sympathetic judge. We had a comprehensive asset freeze ready to slam down on every single corporate and personal account Marcus possessed. We had civil lawsuits for grand larceny and fraud drafted, sealed, and waiting. Most importantly, Richard had personally handed the forged mortgage documents over to his contacts at the federal prosecutor office. The entire legal arsenal was locked and loaded, requiring only a single, pre-arranged text message from my phone to execute. But the quiet legal destruction was not enough for me. I needed his public annihilation to be absolute. That was where Chloe became the most vital piece on the board. While Marcus believed his daughter was still couch surfing with friends, too ashamed and broke to show her face, Chloe had been quietly slipped into the hotel earlier that afternoon. She was dressed in a standard black uniform, blending in perfectly with the massive catering and audiovisual staff hired for the event. I had given her one specific, highly sensitive mission for the evening: placing her in the exact center of his technological setup. As I stood up and smoothed out the fabric of the emerald silk dress, the mansion was dead silent. It was the heavy, anticipatory quiet right before a massive storm makes landfall. Every single card was placed face down on the table. The trap was flawlessly set. I walked out to the waiting limousine, took my husband's arm, and flashed him a bright, empty smile, completely ready to burn his false empire to the ground. The grand ballroom of the hotel was a blinding display of excessive wealth and manufactured prestige. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in heavy white linen. Waiters in pristine black uniforms floated silently across the floor, carrying silver trays of vintage champagne and tiny, intricate appetizers. The room was packed with the exact kind of high-net-worth individuals Marcus desperately needed. I sat at the front table, perfectly upright in my emerald silk dress, wearing the hollow, supportive smile my husband had so viciously demanded. My phone rested quietly in my sequined clutch. I had already sent the single, prearranged text message to Richard Vance just 15 minutes prior. The wheels of justice were fully in motion, rolling quietly toward the stage. On that brightly lit stage, Marcus was holding a gold-plated microphone, utterly in his element. He was delivering a charismatic, impassioned pitch about the future of elite fitness, weaving a masterful illusion of a highly profitable, rapidly expanding empire. He paced the stage with practiced ease, making direct eye contact with the wealthy developers and venture capitalists, confidently asking for $3 million to fund his next vision. And then, he played his final, most emotionally manipulative card. "But none of this," Marcus announced, lowering his voice to a smooth, intimate register as he stopped pacing and gestured toward my table. "Absolutely none of this would be possible without my rock, my brilliant, beautiful wife. She has been the silent architect behind my success, standing by me through every single challenge. Ashley, darling, please come up here." The ballroom erupted into polite, wealthy applause. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my silk dress, walked up the short flight of carpeted stairs, and joined him under the harsh, blinding glare of the spotlight. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, his large fingers pressing warningly into my side, a silent threat masked as affection. He handed me the microphone. He expected a brief, trembling expression of gratitude. He expected total, humiliating submission. I brought the microphone to my lips and looked out over the sea of expectant faces. The room fell into a reverent, attentive hush. "Marcus is entirely correct," I began, my voice ringing out crystal clear and perfectly steady through the massive speakers. "He really could not have built this empire without me. I have undeniably been the primary source of funding for his entire operation." Marcus squeezed my waist approvingly, his fake smile widening for the cameras at the back of the room. He genuinely thought I was playing along perfectly. "However," I continued, taking a slow, deliberate step away from his grip, leaving him standing awkwardly slightly behind me, "I did not contribute through love or shared ambition. I contributed by having my signature expertly forged on a commercial mortgage document. I contributed by having hundreds of thousands of dollars secretly funneled out of a college tuition fund into an illegal shadow trust." The polite smiles in the audience instantly froze. A heavy, confused murmur rippled through the front row. I turned my head just enough to look Marcus directly in the eyes. The arrogant, triumphant flush had completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of pale gray. He reached out to grab the microphone from my hand, but I stepped back again, my voice turning into an unstoppable weapon of mass destruction. "My husband did not invite you here tonight to share in a lucrative opportunity," I announced to the paralyzed crowd, my tone commanding and absolute. "He invited you here to unknowingly bail him out of massive, fraudulent debt. His business is entirely bankrupt, and he has committed multiple federal financial crimes just to keep the lights on long enough to steal your money." Right at that exact second, as if orchestrated by a master conductor, a synchronized chorus of chimes, buzzes, and sharp notification tones erupted across the entire ballroom. Hundreds of cell phones lit up simultaneously in the darkened room. Up in the hidden audiovisual control booth overlooking the stage, Chloe had just executed her mission. She had pressed send on a massive email blast directed to every single investor, guest, and sponsor on the digital guest list. The email contained high-resolution attachments of the forged land deed, the secret trust routing numbers, and the damning, undeniable communications with the black market loan broker. Before Marcus could even process the digital bomb that had just detonated among his guests, a man in a waiter uniform casually walked up the side stairs of the stage, but he was not carrying a tray of champagne. He walked directly up to Marcus, who was standing frozen in the center of the spotlight, and shoved a thick manila envelope hard into his chest. "Marcus," the man said loudly, ensuring the microphone caught his words, "you have been officially served." It was a professional process server. Inside that envelope was an emergency asset freeze, a comprehensive petition for divorce, and a federal subpoena for corporate financial fraud. The collapse was instantaneous and absolutely breathtaking to witness. The ballroom descended into pure, unadulterated chaos. The investors, seasoned financial sharks who smelled legal blood in the water, did not even wait for an explanation or an apology. Chairs scraped violently against the polished floor as men and women grabbed their expensive coats and made a rapid beeline for the exit doors. Handshake deals were loudly and verbally canceled as they walked. The multi-million-dollar lifeline Marcus so desperately needed vanished into thin air. In exactly 10 minutes, the grand, luxurious room was completely empty, save for a few confused hotel staff members and a man standing on a stage holding a stack of legal papers that dictated his absolute ruin. His empire did not just crumble, it was entirely vaporized. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Facing an insurmountable mountain of evidence, Marcus was swiftly indicted and eventually sentenced to federal prison for his extensive financial fraud, while his fake empire was entirely liquidated to pay back a tiny fraction of his massive debts. Chloe's transformation was perhaps the most profound and unexpected, cut off entirely from the illusion of unlimited wealth. She humbled herself. She took a grueling job as a waitress at a local diner, working double shifts just to survive. Every single month, without fail. She sends me a small, hard-earned check to slowly pay back the money her father stole from me. She finally learned the true, heavy value of a single dollar. As for me, I walked out of that 5-star hotel that night and stepped onto the quiet pavement. I looked up at the expansive, dark Denver sky and took a long, deep breath of the crisp night air. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy, suffocating weight of being used as a financial stepping stone was completely gone. I realized then that it is never too late to stop paying the price for the arrogance and stupidity of someone else. It is never too late to close the accounts, cut your losses, and finally start living solely for yourself. To all the amazing listeners out there, I want to sincerely thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today, so please share your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story empowering and thrilling, please remember that this channel will not be uploading new videos here in the coming future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon to keep our community alive. I kindly ask you to please help us continue producing content by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon. There, you can listen to our absolute best, most exclusive true stories that are significantly longer and far too detailed to publish publicly on YouTube. You can easily join our new home by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by using the Patreon link located in the video description or the pinned comment. Thank you again for everything, and never forget your own worth.